The gunshot wound in Tessa Novak's shoulder had stopped bleeding 2 days ago, but the fever that followed left her sprawled beneath a cottonwood tree on the outskirts of Raton, New Mexico, too weak to move and certain she would die there in the scorching June heat of 1878. She had been running for 3 weeks, ever since she witnessed the murder of a federal marshal by the 3 men who now hunted her across the territory, and her supplies had run out 5 days past, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate will to survive that was quickly fading. The sound of hoofbeats approaching made her try to push herself deeper into the sparse shade, but her arms had no strength left, and she could only watch through half-closed eyes as a tall figure on horseback came into view. Blake Yates had been riding the range for the Double R Ranch for 6 years, ever since he turned 19 and left his family's farm in Missouri to seek his fortune out west. He knew every inch of the land between Raton and the Colorado border, and he knew when something was out of place. The flash of faded blue fabric beneath the cottonwood caught his eye first, then the pale hand lying motionless in the dust. He dismounted quickly, his weathered boots hitting the ground with a soft thud as he approached cautiously, one hand on the Colt revolver at his hip. When he got close enough to see her face, his breath caught in his chest. She could not have been more than 20 years old, with dark hair matted against her forehead and skin so pale it looked translucent in the harsh sunlight. But what struck him most was how thin her face had become, the sharp angles of her cheekbones jutting out prominently, her lips cracked and bleeding from dehydration. The hollow look in her half-open eyes spoke of days without food, maybe longer. Blake dropped to one knee beside her and reached for his canteen, lifting her head gently with one hand while he brought the water to her lips. "Easy now," he said softly, his voice rough from years of shouting orders across open plains. "Just a little at first. You drink too fast, and you will be sick." Tessa's eyes focused on him slowly, struggling to make sense of this stranger's face above her. The water touched her lips, and she tried to gulp it desperately, but he pulled it back, true to his word. "I said easy," he repeated, but there was no harshness in his tone. "I am going to help you, but you have got to trust me." He let her have another small sip, then set the canteen aside and looked her over more carefully. The bloodstain on her shoulder made him curse under his breath. The wound looked several days old, and while it was not bleeding anymore, he could feel the heat radiating from her skin that meant infection had set in. "Can you talk?" he asked. "Can you tell me your name?" "Tessa," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. "Please, they are looking for me." Blake glanced around instinctively, scanning the empty landscape for any sign of riders. "Who is looking for you?" "3 men. They killed Marshal Hewitt. I saw them do it. They have been chasing me since Silver City." Silver City was more than 200 miles south. Blake felt a surge of respect for this woman, who had managed to stay alive and ahead of killers for that long. "You are safe now," he told her, though he was not entirely sure that was true. "I am going to get you back to the ranch. We have got a doctor in town who can look at that shoulder." "No town," Tessa said urgently, trying to sit up and failing. "They will find me. They have friends everywhere." Blake considered this. The Double R Ranch was another 3 miles north, and the main house had a bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived. But there was also an old line shack about a mile west that the outfit used during roundup season. It would be isolated, and he could bring her food and supplies without drawing attention. "All right," he said. "No town, but I am taking you somewhere you can rest, and I am going to bring you food and medicine. You are starving, and that wound needs to be cleaned." He did not wait for her to argue. Blake lifted her carefully into his arms, startled by how light she was, how fragile she felt against his chest. He could feel every bone in her body through the thin fabric of her dress. As he settled her onto his horse and climbed up behind her, keeping one arm wrapped securely around her waist so she would not fall, he found himself wondering what kind of men would do this to another human being, would chase an injured woman until she had nothing left. The ride to the line shack took 20 minutes, with Blake keeping his horse at a careful walk so as not to jostle Tessa too much. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her head lolling back against his shoulder. He could feel the fever burning through her, and he pushed down the worry that she might be too far gone to save. He had seen men die from infected wounds before, had watched the life drain out of them no matter how hard anyone tried to help. The line shack was exactly as he had left it 2 months ago, a small wooden structure with a single room, a potbelly stove, and a narrow bed covered with a wool blanket. It was not much, but it was shelter. Blake carried Tessa inside, and laid her gently on the bed, then went back out to unsaddle his horse and tie it to the hitching post. He needed to get back to the ranch, needed to gather supplies without raising suspicion about where he was taking them. Before he left, he made sure she had water within reach and built a small fire in the stove to warm the room. Even though the afternoon was hot, the fever would make her cold soon enough. "I will be back before dark," he promised, though he was not sure she could hear him. "Do not try to leave. You are safe here." The ride back to the Double R took him past the main herd, where several of the other ranch hands were working. His friend Samuel Martinez looked up as Blake rode past and called out a greeting, but Blake just waved and kept going. He could not afford to stop and answer questions right now. At the main house, he found the ranch owner, Robert Ridgway, sitting on the porch going over ledgers. Blake had always gotten along well with the older man, who treated his employees fairly and paid on time, which was more than could be said for many ranchers in the territory. "Blake," Robert said, looking up, "you're back early. Everything all right with the north pasture?" "Yes, sir," Blake said, dismounting. "I need to head back out, though. Thought I saw signs of wolf activity near the old line shack. I want to keep watch tonight, make sure none of them get close to the herd." It was a plausible lie. Wolves were a constant concern for ranchers, and Robert nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. Take whatever you need from the bunkhouse. You want someone to go with you?" "No, sir. I will be fine on my own." Blake headed to the bunkhouse and quickly gathered what he needed: a bedroll, extra food from the supplies kept there for the hands, a bottle of whiskey for cleaning the wound, and some clean cloth for bandages. He also took a spare shirt and pants from his own trunk, figuring Tessa's dress was too torn and dirty to be of much use. One of the ranch hands had a wife in town, who sometimes sold preserves and dried fruit. Blake had bought a jar of peach preserves from her last month that he had been saving. He grabbed that too. By the time he made it back to the line shack, the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tessa was awake, her eyes tracking him as he came through the door with his arms full of supplies. "You came back," she said, and there was such surprise in her voice that it made his chest ache. "I told you I would." Blake set everything down on the small table and came over to the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Terrible," she admitted, but there was the faintest hint of humor in her voice. "But better than I was." "I brought food," he said, "and I need to clean that wound. It is infected, and if we do not take care of it, you could lose the arm. Or worse." Tessa nodded, her jaw tightening. "Do what you have to do." Blake heated water on the stove and brought it over with the whiskey and cloth. "This is going to hurt," he warned her. "I am sorry." He helped her sit up and carefully peeled back the torn fabric of her dress to expose the wound. The sight of it made him wince. The bullet had gone clean through, which was fortunate, but the entry and exit wounds were red and swollen, with streaks of infection spreading outward. He cleaned it as gently as he could, but Tessa still gasped in pain, her fingers clutching at the blanket beneath her. "Almost done," Blake murmured, working quickly. He poured whiskey directly into the wounds, and Tessa cried out, tears streaming down her face. I know, just hold on." When he finally finished bandaging her shoulder, Tessa was shaking and pale, but the wounds were clean. Blake helped her lie back down and pulled the blanket up over her. "You did good," he told her. "That took a lot of courage." "I do not feel very courageous," Tessa said weakly. Blake went to the table and started preparing food. He had brought dried beef, hardtack, and some canned beans, along with the peach preserves. It was not fancy, but it would fill her stomach. He made a thin soup with the beef and beans, figuring that would be easier for her to digest after going so long without eating. When he brought the bowl over to her, Tessa tried to sit up on her own, but could not manage it. Blake slid onto the bed beside her and propped her up against his shoulder, then carefully spooned the warm soup into her mouth. She ate slowly at first, then more eagerly, and he had to remind her to take her time. "When was the last time you ate?" he asked. 5 days, maybe 6, Tessa said between bites. "I had some dried meat I took from a camp I passed, but that ran out." Blake felt anger rising in his chest again, thinking of her alone and starving out there. "Tell me what happened," he said. "Start from the beginning." Tessa was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I was working as a seamstress in Silver City. I had a little room above a dry goods store. One night, I was walking home late after finishing a rush order for one of the saloon girls, and I heard shouting in the alley behind the marshal's office. I should have kept walking, but something made me look. I saw 3 men, and Marshal Hewitt was on the ground. One of them, the tall one with the scar across his cheek, he shot the marshal right in the chest, just like that. I must have made a sound because they all turned and saw me. She paused to take another spoonful of soup, her hands trembling. Blake waited patiently. I ran, Tessa continued. I ran back to my room and grabbed what I could, which was not much. Just some money I had saved and a few pieces of clothing. I knew I had to get out of Silver City before they found me. I bought a horse and started riding north, thinking I could make it to Santa Fe and find help there. But they followed me. They caught up to me outside of Hillsboro. I tried to get away, and that is when one of them shot me. I thought I was dead for sure, but my horse kept running, and somehow I managed to stay in the saddle until we were far enough away that they lost my trail in the dark. What happened to the horse? Blake asked. He went lame 3 days ago. I had to leave him behind. I have been walking since then, trying to stay off the main roads. Blake shook his head in amazement. You are one tough woman, Tessa Novak. I do not feel tough, she said again. I feel like I'm going to die. You are not going to die, Blake said firmly. I am going to make sure of that. He fed her the rest of the soup, then gave her some water and a piece of hardtack softened in broth. When she had eaten as much as she could manage, he helped her lie back down and covered her with the blanket again. Tessa's eyes were already closing, exhaustion pulling her back under. Thank you, she whispered. I do not even know your name. Blake Yates, he told her, and you do not need to thank me. Just rest now. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after she fell asleep, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, the way the firelight from the stove played across her face. Even half-starved and burning with fever, she was beautiful. There was a strength in the set of her jaw, a determination that had kept her alive when most people would have given up. Blake found himself wondering what she had looked like before all of this, when she was healthy and safe and smiling. That night, he made his bed on the floor near the door, his gun within easy reach. He did not think the men chasing Tessa would find them here, but he was not taking any chances. He lay awake listening to her restless sleep, the soft moans she made when the fever dreams took hold. Twice he got up to give her water and check her bandages, and each time she settled more peacefully after, as if some part of her knew she was not alone anymore. The next morning, Blake woke before dawn and checked on Tessa. Her fever had broken during the night, and though she was still pale and weak, her breathing was easier. He built up the fire and made breakfast, more of the soup along with some coffee. The smell of it brought Tessa awake, and she managed to smile when she saw him. Good morning, she said, her voice stronger than it had been the day before. Morning, Blake replied, bringing over a cup of coffee. How are you feeling? Better, much better. Tessa pushed herself up to sitting, wincing at the pain in her shoulder. The fever is gone. I can see that. You had me worried last night. Blake helped her with the coffee, then went to get her breakfast. I need to ride back to the ranch this morning, but I will be back this afternoon with more supplies. Will you be all right here on your own for a few hours? Tessa nodded. I will be fine. Blake, I do not know how I can ever repay you for this. You do not owe me anything, he said simply. Anyone would have done the same. That is not true, Tessa said quietly. I passed 3 other ranches before I collapsed under that tree. No one helped me. No one even looked. Blake did not know what to say to that, so he just squeezed her hand briefly and went to get his things ready. Before he left, he made sure she had food and water within reach, and that the fire was stoked enough to last until he returned. I will be back soon, he promised. At the ranch, Blake went through the motions of his work, checking on the herd and mending fence line with the other hands. But his mind was back at the line shack with Tessa, wondering if she was all right, if her fever had returned, if the men hunting her had somehow picked up her trail. Samuel noticed his distraction and commented on it over lunch. You seem somewhere else today, my friend, Samuel said. Did you see a ghost out at that line shack last night? Blake forced a laugh. Something like that? Just tired, I guess. He finished his work as quickly as he could and headed back to the bunkhouse to gather more supplies. This time, he was more careful about what he took, not wanting to raise suspicion by cleaning out too much food. He also stopped by the main house and asked Mrs. Ridgway if she had any old dresses she did not need anymore. The ranch owner's wife was a kind woman who had always treated the hands well, and she did not ask too many questions, just brought him 2 simple cotton dresses and a shawl. For a lady friend? She asked with a knowing smile. Blake felt his face heat up. Just someone who needs help. She's lucky to have someone like you looking out for her, Mrs. Ridgway said, patting his arm. When Blake returned to the line shack that afternoon, he found Tessa standing at the window, looking out at the landscape. She had managed to get out of bed on her own, which he took as a good sign, but she was swaying slightly on her feet. "You should not be up yet," he said, hurrying over to steady her. "I needed to move," Tessa said. "I have been lying down for too long." Blake guided her back to the bed and handed her the bundle of dresses. "I thought you might want something clean to wear, and I brought more food." Tessa's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the dresses. "You are too kind. I do not deserve this." "Do not say that," Blake said firmly. "You deserve to be safe and cared for. Everyone does." He cooked dinner for them both, a more substantial meal this time, with fresh vegetables he had brought from the ranch garden and some salt pork. They ate together, sitting on the bed with the plates balanced on their laps, and Blake found himself enjoying her company more than he had expected. Tessa had a quick wit and a way of telling stories that made him laugh, despite everything she had been through. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, the daughter of a seamstress who had taught her the trade. Her mother had died of cholera when Tessa was 16, and her father, a railroad worker, had been killed in an accident 2 years later. With no family left, she had headed west looking for work and had ended up in Silver City. "I thought I was finally building a life for myself," she said softly. "I had regular customers, a roof over my head. I was even saving money to open my own shop someday. And then one night, everything fell apart." "It is not over yet," Blake told her. "You are still alive, and you are going to get through this. I will help you." "Why?" Tessa asked, looking at him with those dark eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Why are you doing all of this for a stranger?" Blake was quiet for a moment, trying to put his feelings into words. "I guess because I know what it is like to be alone and scared. When I first came out here, I did not have anyone. I was just a kid who thought he could make his fortune, and I nearly died in my first winter because I did not know what I was doing. A man named Jack Sullivan took me in, taught me everything I know about ranching. He gave me a chance when he did not have to. I figure maybe I am supposed to do the same for someone else." "What happened to Jack?" "He died 3 years ago. Heart gave out one day while we were moving cattle. He was a good man." Blake cleared his throat, pushing down the old grief. "Anyway, I am not doing this for thanks or payment. I am doing it because it is the right thing to do." Tessa reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Well, whether you want to hear it or not, thank you. You saved my life." Blake looked down at their joined hands and felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. He had known this woman for less than a day, but already he felt connected to her in a way he could not quite explain. Maybe it was the vulnerability in her eyes, or the strength he saw beneath her fragile exterior. Or maybe it was simply that she needed him, and he had not realized until now how much he needed to be needed. That night, Blake slept on the floor again, but he found himself lying awake for hours, listening to Tessa's quiet breathing and thinking about what would happen next. He could not keep her hidden at the line shack forever. Eventually, someone from the ranch would need to use it, or the men hunting her would pick up her trail, but he also could not turn her over to the law until he knew more about who he could trust. If these men had friends everywhere, as Tessa said, then going to the sheriff in Radon might just be signing her death warrant. The days fell into a pattern. Blake would ride out to the line shack every morning and evening, bringing food and supplies, checking Tessa's wound, and changing her bandages. During the day, he worked at the ranch, keeping up appearances and making sure no one suspected where he was really spending his time. It was exhausting, but he did not mind. Every time he saw Tessa, she was a little stronger, a little healthier. The hollows in her cheeks were starting to fill out, and color was returning to her skin. She smiled more easily now, and sometimes he caught her humming softly to herself, while she mended her torn dress with needle and thread he had brought her. By the end of the first week, Tessa was well enough to move around the cabin without help, and Blake started teaching her how to shoot his rifle. If the men tracking her did find the line shack, he wanted her to be able to defend herself. "Hold it tight against your shoulder," he instructed, standing behind her and adjusting her grip. "The recoil is going to knock you back if you are not ready for it." Tessa squeezed the trigger and the rifle bucked, but she held steady. The tin can Blake had set up 20 yards away jumped and fell over. "Good shot," he said, genuinely impressed. "Have you fired a gun before?" "My father taught me when I was young. He said every woman should know how to protect herself. Tessa lowered the rifle and turned to look at him. I am glad he did. They practiced until the sun started to set, and then Blake made dinner while Tessa cleaned the rifle and put it away. They had fallen into an easy domesticity that made Blake ache with longing for something he had never let himself want before. He had always been too focused on work, on saving money and building a future, to think much about finding a wife and settling down. But now, watching Tessa move around the small cabin, he found himself imagining what it would be like to come home to her every night, to build a life together. What are you thinking about? Tessa asked, catching him staring. Blake felt his face heat up. Nothing, just tired, I guess. You work too hard, she said softly. You are at the ranch all day, and then you ride out here to take care of me. You need to rest. I will rest when I know you are safe. Tessa came over to where he was standing and put her hand on his arm. Blake, I have been thinking. I cannot stay here forever. Those men are still out there, and every day I hide, I am putting you in danger too. Maybe I should just keep moving. Head up to Colorado or even Wyoming. Get far enough away that they will never find me. No, Blake said, more sharply than he intended. The thought of her leaving, of never seeing her again, was unbearable. You are not running anymore. We are going to figure this out together. How? What can we possibly do against 3 killers who have friends all over the territory? Blake had been thinking about this problem for days, turning it over in his mind during the long hours of ranch work. We need to find someone we can trust, a lawman or a judge who is not connected to whoever these men work for, someone who can take your testimony and make sure you are protected. And how do we find someone like that? I have an idea, Blake said slowly. There is a federal marshal who comes through Rayton sometimes. His name is Daniel Carver, and I have met him a few times. He seems like a straight shooter, not the kind of man who can be bought. If we can get word to him, maybe he can help. Tessa looked uncertain. Are you sure we can trust him? I am not sure of anything, Blake admitted. But I know we cannot handle this alone, and I know you deserve justice for what you saw, for what those men did to Marshal Hewitt. All right, Tessa said finally. But we have to be careful. If word gets back to them that I am still alive and in Rayton, they will come here. I will be careful, Blake promised. The next day, Blake rode into town and asked around about Marshal Carver. He learned that the marshal was due to pass through Rayton in about a week on his way to Denver. That gave them time to prepare, to figure out exactly what they would say and how they would approach him. In the meantime, Blake continued his routine of caring for Tessa. He brought her books from the ranch library to pass the time, and she read to him in the evenings while he cooked or cleaned. They talked about everything and nothing, their dreams and fears, their pasts, and the uncertain future ahead of them. Blake learned that Tessa loved music and had once dreamed of learning to play the piano, that she had a talent for drawing and had filled the margins of her sewing patterns with sketches of flowers and birds. Tessa learned that Blake had a younger sister back in Missouri who wrote him letters once a month, that he had always wanted to own his own ranch someday, but had not yet saved enough money, that he hated coffee, but drank it anyway because it was expected of cowboys. 2 weeks after Blake found her, Tessa's shoulder was healed enough that she could use her arm without pain, and she had gained back some of the weight she had lost. She looked like a different person now, vibrant and alive, instead of the half-dead woman he had lifted onto his horse that first day. Blake found himself noticing things he had not let himself see before, the way her eyes lit up when she laughed, the graceful movements of her hands, the soft curve of her mouth. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset through the cabin window, Tessa turned to him and said, I think I am falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, and Blake felt his heart start to race. He had been trying so hard not to think about his feelings, not to want something he was afraid he could not have. But hearing her say it out loud broke down all his carefully constructed walls. I love you too, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I have been trying not to, because I did not want to complicate things or make you feel obligated to me, but I cannot help it. From the moment I saw you, something in me just knew. Tessa's eyes filled with tears. I was so afraid you only saw me as someone you had to help, some charity case you took pity on. No, Blake said, reaching out to cup her face in his hands. I see you, Tessa, all of you, and you are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever met. He kissed her then, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as she pressed closer to him. It felt like coming home, like finding something he had not even known he was searching for. When they finally broke apart, both of them were trembling. "I do not know what is going to happen," Tessa whispered. "Those men are still out there, and even if Marshal Carver can help us, there is no guarantee I will be safe." "Then we will face it together," Blake told her. "Whatever comes, we will handle it. I am not letting you go, Tessa. Not now, not ever." They spent that night wrapped in each other's arms, talking and kissing and making quiet plans for a future they both desperately wanted to believe in. Blake knew they still had huge obstacles ahead of them, but for the first time since this all started, he felt hopeful. When Marshal Carver finally arrived in Raton, Blake was ready. He had spent the past few days gathering information about the men hunting Tessa, asking careful questions around town about who had connections to Silver City and which local businessmen might be involved in criminal enterprises. What he learned was disturbing. One of the town council members, a man named Victor Thornton, had extensive business interests in Silver City and was rumored to have his fingers in everything from gambling to smuggling. If the men who killed Marshal Hewitt were working for someone, Thornton was the most likely candidate. Blake met Marshal Carver at the hotel, catching him just as he was checking in. The marshal was a tall man in his 40s with iron gray hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Marshal Carver," Blake said, approaching him. "My name is Blake Yates. I work at the Double R Ranch. I need to speak with you about something important." Carver studied him for a moment. "I remember you. You helped me track that horse thief last year. What is this about?" "Not here," Blake said quietly, glancing around at the other people in the hotel lobby. "Can we talk somewhere private?" The marshal nodded and led Blake up to his room. Once the door was closed, Blake told him everything. About finding Tessa, about the murder she had witnessed, about the men who had chased her across hundreds of miles of territory. He gave Carver the names and descriptions Tessa had provided, and he shared his suspicions about Victor Thornton. When Blake finished, Marshal Carver was quiet for a long moment. "This is serious," he said finally. "If what you are saying is true, we are talking about murder of a federal officer and corruption that goes all the way up to the territorial government. I am going to need to speak with Miss Novak myself, get her full testimony." "I will bring her to you," Blake said, "but it has to be done carefully. If Thornton or his men find out she is here, they will come for her." "Understood. Can you bring her here tonight, after dark? I will make sure no one sees her." Blake agreed and hurried back to the line shack. Tessa was nervous about meeting the marshal, but she trusted Blake's judgment. They waited until full dark, and then Blake brought her into town, taking back roads and staying in the shadows. He left his horse at a stable on the edge of town, and they walked the rest of the way to the hotel, slipping in through a back entrance. Marshal Carver was waiting in his room, and he stood when they entered, his expression kind. "Miss Novak, I am Daniel Carver. Please sit down. I know this has been difficult for you, but I need you to tell me everything you remember about the night Marshal Hewitt was killed." Tessa sat down and took a deep breath, and then she began to talk. She described the three men in detail, from the scar on the tall one's face, to the limp of the second man, to the distinctive silver belt buckle worn by the third. She recounted exactly what she had heard them say, including a name that made Marshal Carver's eyes widen: Victor Thornton. "They were talking about how Thornton would be pleased that the marshal was dead," Tessa said. "They said something about a shipment that was coming through next week that Hewitt would have interfered with." "Did you hear anything else about this shipment?" Carver asked. "Just that it was coming up from Mexico, and that it was worth enough money to set them all up for life." Marshal Carver sat back, his expression grim. "I have been investigating Thornton for over a year, trying to gather enough evidence to bring charges against him. But he is careful, and he has powerful friends. Your testimony could be exactly what I need to finally take him down." "What happens now?" Blake asked. "Now I send telegrams to my superiors and to the federal courthouse in Santa Fe. I am going to need Miss Novak to stay safe until we can get her in front of a judge to give her testimony officially. After that, we will bring Thornton and his men in for trial." "How long will that take?" Tessa asked. "A few weeks, maybe a month. I know that is a long time to wait, but I need you to trust that I will keep you safe." Blake shook his head. "She cannot stay hidden in that line shack for a month. It is only a matter of time before someone from the ranch needs to use it, or before those men pick up her trail." "Then where do you suggest she go?" Carver asked. Blake had been thinking about this all day. My friend Samuel Martinez has a family ranch about 30 miles north of here, just across the Colorado border. His mother and sisters live there. Tessa could stay with them. It is remote enough that no one would think to look for her there, and Samuel is someone I trust with my life. Marshall Carver considered this. That could work, but we would need to move her there without anyone knowing. If Thornton gets word that Miss Novak is alive, he will send his men after her. I can arrange it, Blake said. I will take her there myself, tonight, if necessary. Give me 1 day, Carver said. Let me send my telegrams and get confirmation from Santa Fe that they are ready to move forward with this. Then you can take her north. In the meantime, she should stay at the line shack and keep out of sight. They agreed to the plan, and Blake and Tessa slipped back out of the hotel, the same way they had come in. The ride back to the line shack seemed longer than usual, both of them tense and alert for any sign they were being followed. But the night was quiet, and they made it back without incident. Do you really trust Marshall Carver? Tessa asked once they were safely inside. I do, Blake said. He is a good man. If anyone can help us, it is him. And Samuel's family? You are sure they will take me in? I am sure. Samuel's mother, Maria, is one of the kindest people I have ever met. She took me in once when I was sick with pneumonia and nursed me back to health. She will not turn you away. Tessa was quiet for a moment. This is really going to end, is not it? One way or another, this nightmare is almost over. Blake pulled her into his arms. It is going to end, and when it does, we are going to build the life we talked about. I am going to save up enough money to buy us a little piece of land, and we are going to build a house and raise horses and have a family. Everything is going to be all right. I want to believe that so badly, Tessa said, her voice muffled against his chest. Then believe it, Blake told her. Have faith in us. The next day seemed to crawl by. Blake went through his work at the ranch in a fog, his mind constantly on Tessa and the plan they had made. He found Samuel during lunch and pulled him aside. I need to ask you a favor, Blake said. A big one. Samuel looked at him with concern. What is going on, my friend? You have been acting strange for weeks now. Blake hesitated, then decided to trust him with the truth. He told Samuel everything, about Tessa and the murder and the men hunting her. Samuel listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with every word. Of course she can stay with my family, Samuel said when Blake finished. My mother will be happy to help. When do you want to take her there? Tomorrow night, if Marshall Carver gives us the go-ahead. I will ride up there tomorrow morning and let my mother know to expect you. But Blake, you need to be careful. If these men are as dangerous as you say, they will not hesitate to kill anyone who gets in their way. I know, Blake said grimly. That is why I am getting Tessa as far away from here as possible. That evening, Blake met with Marshall Carver again. The marshal had received confirmation from Santa Fe and was ready to move forward with the plan. I want you to take Miss Novak to the Martinez ranch tomorrow night, Carver said. Stay with her there until you hear from me. It should not be more than 2 weeks before we are ready to bring her to Santa Fe for her testimony. In the meantime, I'm going to start making some discreet inquiries about Thornton and see if I can locate the 3 men Miss Novak described. What if they come looking for her? Blake asked. Then you make sure they do not find her. I know you care about this woman, Blake. That is clear as day, so you keep her safe no matter what it takes. Blake spent one last night at the line shack with Tessa, and in the morning they prepared for the journey north. Blake had told Mr. Ridgway that he needed a few weeks away from the ranch to deal with a family matter, and the ranch owner had given him the time without asking too many questions. Tessa packed the few belongings she had into a small bag, and they waited for darkness to fall before setting out. The ride to the Martinez ranch took most of the night. They traveled slowly, staying off the main roads and keeping to the cover of trees and hills as much as possible. Blake kept his rifle across his lap, ready for trouble, but the night remained quiet. As dawn broke, they finally saw the Martinez homestead in the distance, a cluster of adobe buildings surrounded by corrals and fields. Samuel's mother, Maria, came out to greet them as they rode up. She was a small, round woman with graying hair and a warm smile that reminded Blake of his own mother back in Missouri. Samuel told me you were coming, she said, taking Tessa's hands in hers. You poor thing. Come inside. You must be exhausted. Maria led them into the house where Samuel's 3 sisters were preparing breakfast. The women fussed over Tessa, bringing her food and fresh clothes and generally making her feel welcome. Blake could see the tension draining out of Tessa's shoulders as she realized she was truly safe here. "Thank you," Tessa said to Maria. "I do not know how to repay your kindness." "There is nothing to repay," Maria said firmly. "We help each other. That is how we survive out here." Blake stayed at the Martinez ranch for the next 2 weeks, sleeping in the barn and helping with the daily chores to earn his keep. During the day, he worked alongside Samuel and his father, Jose, mending fences and tending to the cattle. In the evenings, he sat with Tessa on the porch, and they watched the sun set over the Colorado plains, talking about their future and dreaming of the day when all of this would be behind them. Tessa flourished in the safety and warmth of the Martinez family. She helped Maria and the sisters with cooking and sewing, and she spent hours playing with Samuel's young nieces and nephews, who adored her. Blake loved watching her with the children, seeing the natural maternal instinct in the way she held them and told them stories. It made him ache to give her children of their own, to see her happy and safe and surrounded by family. "You are going to be a wonderful father someday," Tessa told him one evening as they sat together on the porch. "And you are going to be an amazing mother," Blake replied, pulling her close. "How many children do you want?" Tessa asked, a teasing note in her voice. "As many as you are willing to give me, 3 or 4, maybe more." "That is a lot of children," Tessa laughed. "But I like the sound of it, a house full of noise and chaos and love." "We will give them everything we did not have," Blake said seriously. "Stability and security and parents who are there for them. They are going to be so loved," Tessa said softly. "Just like I love you." "I love you too, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, wrapped in each other's arms and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Blake had never felt more at peace than he did in this moment, with Tessa beside him and the promise of a future together stretching out ahead of them. On the 14th day, Marshal Carver arrived at the ranch. Blake saw him riding up the road and went out to meet him, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. "We are ready," Carver said without preamble. "I have arrested 2 of the 3 men Miss Novak described. The third one, the one with the scar, is still at large. But we have enough evidence now to bring charges against Victor Thornton. I need Miss Novak to come to Santa Fe and give her testimony before the federal judge." "What about her safety?" Blake asked. "If one of those men is still out there, he could come after her." "I am bringing a full escort," Carver said. 6 armed deputies. "And once we have Thornton in custody, that man will have no one left to pay him. He will run as far and as fast as he can." Blake was not entirely convinced, but he knew they could not wait forever. "All right, when do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning. The sooner we get this done, the sooner Miss Novak can start living her life again." That night, Blake and Tessa lay together in the barn, holding each other close. "I am scared," Tessa admitted. "What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing is going to go wrong," Blake said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Marshal Carver knows what he is doing, and I am going to be with you every step of the way. Once you give your testimony, this will all be over. Thornton will be in prison, and you will be free." "And then what?" Tessa asked. "What happens to us?" "Then I take you home," Blake said. "I am going to talk to Mr. Ridgway about buying a piece of land on the edge of his property. It is not much, maybe 20 acres, but it has a creek running through it and good grass for horses. We can build a house there, start our own little ranch. It will take time and hard work, but we can do it together." "I would live in a tent with you if that was all we had," Tessa said. "As long as we are together, I do not care where we are." "You are not going to live in a tent," Blake said, kissing her forehead. "I am going to build you a proper house with a real roof and a kitchen and a bedroom with windows that look out over the creek, and we are going to fill it with children and laughter and everything good that life has to offer." The journey to Santa Fe took 3 days. Blake rode beside the wagon that carried Tessa and Marshal Carver, his rifle always at the ready. The 6 deputies Carver had brought spread out around them, watching for any sign of trouble. But the trip was uneventful, and they arrived in Santa Fe without incident. The federal courthouse was an imposing stone building in the center of town. Blake stayed with Tessa as she gave her testimony before Judge Harrison, a stern-faced man who listened carefully to every word she said. Tessa was nervous at first, her voice shaking as she recounted the night of Marshal Hewitt's murder. But as she continued, her voice grew stronger and more confident. She described everything she had seen and heard, every detail that might help convict the men responsible. When she finished, Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. Miss Novak, you have shown remarkable courage in coming forward with this testimony. I want you to know that I take these charges very seriously. Victor Thornton will be arrested today, and he will stand trial for his crimes. In the meantime, you are free to go. You have my personal guarantee that the law will protect you from any retaliation. Tessa let out a shaky breath and reached for Blake's hand. Thank you, Your Honor. Outside the courthouse, Marshal Carver shook Blake's hand. You did good, bringing her here. She is one brave woman. I know, Blake said. What happens now? Now I go arrest Thornton and anyone else involved in this mess. You two get on with your lives. You have earned it. Blake and Tessa left Santa Fe that same afternoon, both of them eager to put the past behind them. They rode back toward Rayton, stopping along the way to rest and talk about their plans. By the time they reached the Double R Ranch, Blake had made up his mind about exactly what he wanted to do. He found Mr. Ridgway in his office going over accounts. Sir, I would like to talk to you about buying that 20-acre parcel on the east side of your property. Robert Ridgway looked up with interest. I did not know you were interested in buying land, Blake. What brought this on? I am getting married, Blake said, unable to keep the smile off his face, and I want to build a home for my wife and start my own place. Well, congratulations, Ridgway said, standing to shake Blake's hand. That is wonderful news. Who is the lucky lady? Her name is Tessa Novak. She is the woman I was helping these past few weeks. Ridgway nodded knowingly. I suspected as much. Mrs. Ridgway said you had a lady friend. Well, I am happy to sell you that land, Blake. You have been a good worker for me, and I would be glad to have you as a neighbor. We can work out the terms so you can pay me over time. Thank you, sir. That means a lot to me. Blake left the office feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He found Tessa waiting for him at the bunkhouse, and when he told her about the land, she threw her arms around his neck and kissed him. We are really doing this, she said, her eyes shining with tears of joy. We are going to have our own home. We are, Blake confirmed. Now we just need to make it official. Will you marry me, Tessa Novak? Yes, Tessa said without hesitation. 1,000 times, yes. They were married a week later, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Raton. Samuel stood as Blake's best man, and Maria and her daughters served as witnesses. It was not a fancy wedding, but it was perfect. Tessa wore one of the cotton dresses Blake had given her, and Blake wore his cleanest shirt and a nervous smile. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Blake kissed Tessa like he was sealing a sacred promise, which, in a way, he was. The Martinez family hosted a celebration dinner at their ranch, and Blake and Tessa spent their first night as a married couple in the same barn where they had sheltered weeks earlier. It felt right, coming full circle like this, starting their new life in the place where they had first dared to hope for a future together. The next day, they returned to the Double R Ranch and began the hard work of building their home. Blake and Samuel spent long days cutting timber and hauling stones for the foundation. Tessa worked alongside them when she could, and in the evenings, she planned out every detail of their future house, from the placement of the windows to the design of the fireplace. It took 3 months to build the house, with help from the other ranch hands and the Martinez family. By October, it was finished, a sturdy 2-room cabin with a covered porch and a view of the creek Blake had promised Tessa. It was not large or fancy, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and filled with their dreams. On their first night in the new house, Blake carried Tessa over the threshold, and they stood together in the empty front room, looking around at the space they would fill with a lifetime of memories. It is perfect, Tessa said, tears streaming down her face. I never thought I could be this happy. This is just the beginning, Blake told her. We have our whole lives ahead of us. They furnished the house slowly, buying pieces when they could afford them, and building others themselves. Tessa sewed curtains for the windows and quilts for the bed. Blake built a table and chairs and shelves to hold Tessa's growing collection of books. They planted a garden in the spring and raised chickens for eggs. It was hard work, but it was their work, and every improvement they made to the homestead felt like a victory. In the spring of 1879, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. Blake was overcome with joy when she told him, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. We are going to have a baby, he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. We are going to be parents. Are you ready for this? Tessa asked, putting her hand on her still flat stomach. "I have been ready since the day I met you," Blake said. "I love you, Tessa, and I am going to love our child with everything I have." The pregnancy was not easy. Tessa was sick for the first few months, and Blake worried constantly about her and the baby. But as the months passed and Tessa's belly grew round and full, his worry was replaced by wonder. He loved watching her body change, loved feeling the baby kick beneath his hand when he rested it on her stomach at night. Their son was born in late October, on a crisp autumn day when the aspens on the hillsides were turning gold. Blake was there for the birth, holding Tessa's hand and whispering encouragement, as Maria and the midwife she had brought from town guided the baby into the world. When Blake heard his son's first cry, he felt something break open inside his chest, a rush of love so powerful it brought him to his tears. "He is perfect," Tessa said weakly, holding the baby against her chest. "Look at him, Blake. We made him." Blake looked down at his son, at the tiny perfect face and the dark fuzz of hair on his head, and he knew he would do anything to protect this child, to give him the life he deserved. "What should we name him?" he asked. "I was thinking James," Tessa said, "after my father, James Blake Yates." "James," Blake repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, son." The first year of James's life was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Blake and Tessa took turns walking the floor with him when he cried at night, and they marveled at every milestone, his first smile, his first laugh, the day he rolled over for the first time. Blake had never known he could feel this much love for another person, but James had expanded his capacity for love in ways he had not thought possible. As James grew into a bright, curious toddler, Blake and Tessa talked about having more children. They both wanted a large family, and in the spring of 1881, Tessa became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she was able to keep working around the homestead, almost until the day their daughter was born. They named her Rose, after the wild roses that grew along the creek. Rose was a quiet baby compared to her brother, with Tessa's dark eyes and Blake's stubborn chin. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding her to changing her diapers. Blake loved watching his children together, seeing the bond already forming between them. By 1883, Blake and Tessa had built a thriving little ranch. They had expanded the house to include 2 more bedrooms, and Blake had built a barn for their growing herd of horses. The horse breeding business Blake had dreamed of was starting to pay off, and they were finally making enough money to not just survive, but to thrive. Tessa had opened a small seamstress business from their home, taking in orders from the women in Ratton and the surrounding ranches. She was known for her skill and attention to detail, and she often had more work than she could handle. Blake was proud of her success and of the way she balanced running a business with raising their children. In the spring of 1884, Tessa gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Matthew. Matthew was a happy, easy baby who seemed content to just observe the world around him with wide, thoughtful eyes. With 3 children under the age of 5, life was chaotic and exhausting, but Blake would not have changed a thing. One evening, as Blake sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Tessa came out and sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about that day I found you under the cottonwood tree?" Blake asked. "All the time," Tessa said. "I think about how close I came to dying, and how you saved me." "You saved yourself," Blake said. "You survived for weeks on your own before I found you. All I did was give you a chance to rest and heal." "You gave me so much more than that," Tessa said. "You gave me hope. You gave me love. You gave me this life that I never thought I could have. I was running and scared and alone, and you saw me. Not as a problem to solve or a responsibility to bear, but as a person worth saving, worth loving." Blake pulled her closer. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. All of this, our home, our children, everything we have built together, it all started with you." "It started with us," Tessa corrected, "and it is going to continue with us. We are going to grow old together. Blake Yates, we are going to watch our children grow up and have children of their own. We are going to build a legacy that lasts long after we are gone." "That sounds perfect to me," Blake said. They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their children playing inside the house and the soft murmur of the creek below. Blake thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment, all the fear and pain and uncertainty that had led them to each other. He thought about the thin, starving woman he had found beneath that cottonwood tree, and the strong, vibrant woman sitting beside him now. The transformation was nothing short of miraculous, and he was grateful every single day that he had been there to witness it, to be a part of it. As the years passed, the Yates family continued to grow and flourish. Tessa gave birth to 2 more children, twin girls they named Sarah and Emma, in 1886. With 5 children, the house was always full of noise and laughter and love. Blake built an addition to make room for everyone, and they filled every corner with the evidence of their full, rich life together. James grew into a responsible young man who loved working with his father on the ranch. By the time he was 12, he could rope and ride as well as any of the adult ranch hands, and he had a natural way with horses that made Blake proud. Rose was quieter than her siblings, but she had inherited her mother's talent for sewing and design. She spent hours drawing dress patterns and helping Tessa with her seamstress work. Matthew had a head for numbers and helped Blake keep the ranch accounts, while Sarah and Emma were inseparable and equally mischievous, always getting into some kind of trouble together. Blake and Tessa watched their children grow, with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness that time was passing too quickly. But they also knew they had given their children exactly what they had promised each other that night on the Martinez Ranch porch: stability and security, and parents who were always there for them. In 1890, when James turned 11, Blake sat him down and told him the story of how he had found Tessa, his mother, dying under a cottonwood tree. He told him about the men who had hunted her, about the courage it took for her to survive and to trust Blake to help her. James listened with wide eyes, seeing his mother in a new light. "She is the bravest person I know," Blake told his son, "and I want you to remember that women are not weak or helpless. Your mother survived things that would have broken most men. So you treat women with respect, and you never underestimate what they are capable of." "I will, Pa," James promised. "I will make you and Ma proud." "You already do, son, every single day." As Blake and Tessa moved into their 40s, they watched the world around them change. The wild frontier of their youth was slowly being tamed, with more railroads and towns and people moving west. But their little corner of New Mexico remained relatively untouched, and they were content with the life they had built. In 1895, tragedy struck when Victor Thornton, who had been serving a life sentence in the territorial prison, died. Marshall Carver, now retired, came to visit Blake and Tessa to give them the news personally. "I thought you would want to know," Carver said. He never admitted to ordering the marshal's death, but he died knowing he had been caught. "That is thanks to you, Miss Novak. Or, I suppose it is Mrs. Yates now." "It is," Tessa said, smiling at Blake. "And thank you for everything you did for us, Marshal Carver. You gave us the chance to have this life." "You gave yourselves that chance," Carver said. "I just helped clear the path. You two did all the hard work." After Carver left, Blake and Tessa stood on their porch looking out at the ranch they had built, at the children playing in the yard and the horses grazing in the pasture. "It is really over," Tessa said softly. "That part of our lives is finally, truly over. And look at everything we have now," Blake said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Was it worth it, all the fear and running and uncertainty?" "Every single moment," Tessa said without hesitation, "because it brought me to you, and I would go through it all again if I had to, as long as I ended up here, with you, with our children, with this life we have built together." Blake kissed her then, soft and sweet, the kind of kiss that spoke of years of love and trust and partnership. "I love you, Tessa Yates. I have loved you since the moment I saw how thin your face had become from going without, and I knew I had to take care of you. And I am going to keep loving you and taking care of you for the rest of my life." "And I am going to keep loving you right back," Tessa said, "forever and always." They stood together on the porch as the sun set, casting long shadows across their land. Inside the house, their children were setting the table for dinner, their voices rising in playful argument about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. It was an ordinary moment in an ordinary day, but for Blake and Tessa, it was everything. It was the life they had fought for, the happiness they had earned, the love they had built from nothing but faith and determination, and the simple act of one person choosing to help another in their darkest moment. As the years continued to pass, Blake and Tessa grew old together, their hair turning silver and their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminished. They watched their children marry and have children of their own, filling the ranch with a new generation of Yates family members. James took over the day-to-day operations of the horse breeding business, while Rose opened a dress shop in Raton that became the most popular in the territory. Matthew became a banker, helping other families like his parents build their own dreams. Sarah and Emma married brothers from a neighboring ranch and settled close by, bringing their children to visit their grandparents every Sunday. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, Blake and Tessa sat on their porch once again, watching the sun set just as they had done thousands of times before. 30 years, Tessa marveled. Where did the time go? It went into building this, Blake said, gesturing at the bustling ranch around them, into raising our children and watching them grow, into loving you every single day. I used to have nightmares, Tessa admitted quietly. For years after we got married, I would wake up in a panic, thinking I was back under that cottonwood tree, dying alone. But then I would feel you beside me, and I would remember that I was safe, that I was home. You are home, Blake said firmly. You have been home since the day I found you, and you always will be. Tessa reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. Thank you, she said, for seeing me, for feeding me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life. Thank you for letting me, Blake replied, for trusting me when you had every reason not to, for choosing to build a life with me instead of running, for loving me back. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as their grandchildren ran around the yard, playing the same games their own children had played decades earlier. The ranch had grown far beyond what Blake had imagined that first day when he carried Tessa into the line shack. They now had over 100 acres, with a thriving horse breeding operation that supplied animals to ranches and cavalry units across the Southwest. The original 2-room cabin had been expanded multiple times and was now a sprawling ranch house with 8 bedrooms and a kitchen large enough to feed an army. But more than the physical growth of the ranch, Blake was proud of the family they had created. Their children were good people, kind and hard-working, and devoted to each other. They had passed on the values Blake and Tessa had instilled in them to their own children, creating a legacy that would last for generations. In the summer of 1912, the entire Yates family gathered at the ranch for a reunion. All 5 of Blake and Tessa's children were there, along with their spouses and children. The house was bursting at the seams with people, and the noise level was almost unbearable, but Blake had never been happier. He stood in the middle of the chaos and looked around at all these people who existed, because he had stopped to help a dying woman under a cottonwood tree 34 years earlier. That evening, after the children had been put to bed and the adults were sitting around talking, James stood up and called for everyone's attention. I want to make a toast, he said, raising his glass. To Ma and Pa. You two have built something incredible here. You created a home that is filled with love and laughter, and you showed all of us what it means to commit to someone and to build a life together through hard work and dedication. You have been an example to us in every way, and we are all grateful for the sacrifices you made and the love you have given us. To Ma and Pa. To Ma and Pa, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Blake looked at Tessa and saw tears streaming down her face. He pulled her close and kissed her forehead. Look at what we made, he whispered. All of this came from us. All of this came from you stopping to help a stranger, Tessa corrected. Everything good in my life started with that one act of kindness. And everything good in my life started when I saw your face and knew I had to save you, Blake said. We saved each other, Tessa. That is what love does. It saves us from the darkness and gives us light. As the night wore on and the family members gradually drifted off to bed, Blake and Tessa found themselves alone on the porch once more. The stars were bright overhead, and a cool breeze was blowing down from the mountains. Do you remember what you said to me that first night at the line shack? Blake asked. You said you thought you were going to die. I remember, Tessa said. I was sure of it. I had given up. I am glad you did not give up, Blake said. I am glad you held on long enough for me to find you. I am glad you found me, Tessa replied. And I am glad you fed me every day after that, even when I was too weak to ask for it. You saw how thin my face had become from going without, and you decided to do something about it. That simple act of compassion changed everything. Blake thought about that, about how one decision to stop and help had led to 34 years of love and partnership and family. It seemed impossible that so much could come from one moment, but that was the power of love. It multiplied and grew and created things that had not existed before. "I would do it again," he said. "1,000 times over, I would make the same choice." "So would I," Tessa said. "I would choose you every single time." They sat together until the stars began to fade and the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon. As the sun rose on a new day, Blake and Tessa Yates remained on their porch, surrounded by the evidence of their love and commitment. The ranch was waking up around them, with children stirring and the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. It was the beginning of another day in a life full of ordinary, beautiful days. Blake looked at his wife, at the woman who had come into his life as a near corpse under a cottonwood tree and had become his everything. Her face was lined now, marked by years of laughter and tears and hard work. But to him, she was as beautiful as she had been that first day. More beautiful, actually, because now he knew every detail of her, every strength and weakness, every dream and fear. He knew the sound of her laughter and the way she hummed while she worked. He knew how she took her coffee and which side of the bed she preferred. He knew her completely, and he loved her with a depth that still took his breath away. "I love you," he said, because even after 34 years, those words were still important, still necessary. "I love you too," Tessa replied, squeezing his hand. "Always and forever." As the sun climbed higher in the sky and the ranch came fully to life, Blake and Tessa finally stood and went inside to start their day. They had a large family to feed and a ranch to run. There would be grandchildren to hug and horses to tend, and 100 small tasks that made up the fabric of their lives. It was not the exciting, dramatic life of adventure that people sometimes dreamed about. It was better than that. It was real and solid and built on a foundation of love that had weathered every storm. That evening, after the last family members had headed home and the ranch was quiet again, Blake and Tessa prepared for bed. They moved through their nighttime routine with the ease of long practice. And when they finally climbed into bed, Tessa curled up against Blake's side the way she had done every night for 34 years. "Blake," she said softly. "Yes, I am happy. Right now, in this moment, I am completely happy. I wanted you to know that." Blake felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I am happy too. Happier than I ever imagined I could be." "We did good, did we not?" Tessa asked. "With our lives, with our children, with everything?" "We did real good," Blake confirmed. "We did real good." They fell asleep in each other's arms, the way they had done thousands of times before. Outside, the ranch settled into the quiet rhythms of night. The horses dozed in their stalls, the creek murmured over its rocky bed, and the stars wheeled slowly overhead. Everything was peaceful, everything was right, everything was exactly as it should be. Blake and Tessa Yates had built a life together from nothing more than one man's decision to help a dying woman and one woman's decision to trust a stranger. They had created a family, a home, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. They had proven that love, real love, was not just about grand gestures and dramatic moments. It was about showing up every day and choosing each other over and over again. It was about feeding someone when they were hungry, holding them when they were scared, and building a future together, one decision at a time. Years later, when Blake was in his 70s and Tessa in her late 60s, they would sit on that same porch and tell their great-grandchildren the story of how they met. The children would sit wide-eyed, listening to the tale of the dying woman under the cottonwood tree and the cowboy who stopped to save her. They would ask questions and beg for more details, and Blake and Tessa would smile at each other, remembering those dark days that had led to such brightness. The most important thing, Blake would always tell the children at the end of the story, is that when you see someone who needs help, you stop. You do not walk past. You do not look away. You stop and you help, because you never know what might come from one act of kindness. "Your grandfather is right," Tessa would add. "One person choosing to be kind can change everything. It changed my life. It gave me all of you, and I am grateful for it every single day." The children would nod solemnly, taking in the lesson, and then they would run off to play, leaving Blake and Tessa alone once more. And Blake would look at his wife, still beautiful to him after all these years, and he would take her hand and squeeze it gently, a silent reminder of everything they had shared and everything they still had to look forward to. Because their story was not just about survival or rescue or even love, though it was all of those things. It was about two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and had chosen to build something beautiful together. It was about the power of compassion and the strength that comes from having someone stand beside you through whatever life throws your way. It was about feeding someone, not just with food, but with hope and love and the promise of better days ahead. And as the sun set on another day at the ranch Blake and Tessa had built together, they knew they had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They had created a life full of love and family and purpose. They had turned one moment of kindness into a lifetime of happiness. And they had proven that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply see someone who is hurting and choose to help them heal. That was their legacy. That was their gift to the world. And that was the story they would pass down through the generations, a testament to the enduring power of love and the life-changing impact of one person choosing to care.